The pool pump's whisper-quiet hum was the only sound in my backyard when Veronica Hartwell marched up my driveway with two police officers flanking her like bodyguards. Half my pool sat drained. The expensive filtration system exposed. $20,000 of renovation work on full display. The muddy water line showed exactly where I'd stopped this morning, and my professional-grade sump pump sat silent beside the deep end. Its noise level barely audible, even from 3 feet away. Veronica's perfectly manicured finger pointed at me like a weapon while she whispered something urgent to Officer Bradley, whose hand rested casually on his radio. Officer Chen took notes on a small pad, his expression serious as he surveyed my property. The morning sun cast long shadows across my lawn, and I could feel my neighbors' eyes watching from behind their curtains as this drama unfolded. But here's what made me smile despite being cornered by law enforcement. What Veronica Hartwell didn't know was that I'd spent 12 years writing the municipal codes she was about to weaponize against me. And the noise complaint she'd filed? Well, that was about to become the most expensive mistake of her real estate career. Before I tell you how Veronica's noise complaint backfired into a 6-figure nightmare that destroyed her HOA empire, I'm curious about something. Have you ever dealt with that one neighbor who turns every homeowners association rule into their personal weapon? The type who measures your grass with a ruler and calls code enforcement if your holiday lights stay up one day too long? If you've got a story about an HOA tyrant who finally got their comeuppance, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Trust me, after you hear what happened to Veronica, you'll want to share every detail of your own neighborhood justice story. The thing about bullies is they always assume everyone else is as ignorant as they need them to be. Veronica had no idea that the quiet guy who'd moved into 847 Maple Ridge Drive 8 months ago had authored half the municipal regulations she'd been quoting like scripture. She certainly didn't know that my seemingly simple pool renovation was actually a continuing education demonstration project, or that my retirement from municipal code enforcement had more to do with exposing corruption than seeking a peaceful suburban life. My name is Marcus Sullivan, and at 45, I thought I'd seen every trick in the book when it came to people abusing authority. 12 years as a municipal code enforcement officer in 3 different districts had taught me that the biggest violators are often the ones shouting loudest about everyone else's compliance. After my divorce finalized last spring, this house represented more than just a fresh start. It was proof that playing by the rules and doing things right could still build something beautiful. The pool project wasn't just about having a place to swim. My ex-wife had always complained that I spent too much time obsessing over regulations and technicalities. But now those same skills were creating something meaningful. Every permit pulled properly. Every safety standard exceeded. Every municipal requirement not just met but surpassed. The irony wasn't lost on me that the expertise she'd found boring was now building the life I actually wanted. Maplewood Heights had attracted me specifically because of its reputation for high standards. Properties in this neighborhood started at $800,000, and the HOA covenants were supposedly designed to protect those investments. The community pool restrictions required any residential pool to match established aesthetic standards while maintaining structural integrity consistent with municipal safety codes. I'd read those words a dozen times because I'd helped write similar language in 2 other districts. What I hadn't expected was Veronica Hartwell. As HOA board president for 6 years, Veronica had turned violation enforcement into performance art. She collected penalty fees like trophies and seemed to take personal satisfaction in making examples of residents who didn't meet her approval. Real estate investment was her primary business, with rental properties scattered across 3 zip codes. But wielding HOA authority had become her true passion project. The woman had tried to block my purchase entirely, claiming my background in municipal enforcement represented a potential conflict of interest with community harmony. When that failed, she'd made my first 8 months in Maplewood Heights a masterclass in creative harassment. My mailbox color violated historical aesthetic guidelines, a $50 fine. My hedge height exceeded neighborhood uniformity standards, $75. My Halloween decorations stayed up until November 2nd, $125 for seasonal display violations. Each complaint came with official-looking documentation and threats of legal action. Each penalty had to be paid within 30 days or face escalating enforcement procedures. Most residents just paid up rather than fight City Hall. But Veronica had picked the wrong target. Every citation she'd issued was technically correct according to HOA bylaws, but every single one pushed the boundaries of reasonable enforcement. I'd been documenting everything, waiting for her to cross the line from aggressive to illegal. The pool renovation represented her biggest opportunity yet. A project this substantial meant months of potential violations, thousands of dollars in possible fines, and the chance to establish precedent for future enforcement actions. What she saw as her ultimate victory, I recognized as her inevitable downfall. That Tuesday morning started like any other construction day. My alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., and I was outside by 6, reviewing the day's work plan while sipping coffee in the pre-dawn silence. The pool was halfway through its drainage cycle, the old liner removed, and the substrate prepared for the new filtration system installation. Everything was proceeding exactly according to the permits I'd pulled and the timeline I'd submitted to the HOA Architectural Review Committee. The sump pump I'd selected specifically for this project was a commercial-grade unit designed for urban environments where noise ordinances mattered. At 42 decibels, it ran quieter than most household refrigerators. I'd tested it extensively before purchase because noise complaints were the easiest way for opponents to shut down legitimate construction projects. When you've seen neighbors weaponize sound regulations to stop projects they simply didn't like, you learn to eliminate that vector entirely. By 6:30 a.m., I was reviewing filtration schematics when my phone buzzed with a call from Frank Castellano. Frank had been my mentor during my early code enforcement days, a 30-year veteran who'd retired from municipal inspection work, but still consulted on complex projects. His expertise had saved my career more than once, and his friendship had survived my contentious departure from the department. "Marcus, got a heads up for you." Frank's gravelly voice carried its usual mix of concern and amusement. "Veronica Hartwell called the city noise complaint line at 6:32 this morning. Filed a formal complaint about excessive construction noise from your address, specifically citing municipal code violations and demanding immediate enforcement action." I looked at my whisper-quiet pump and couldn't help laughing. "Frank, I'm running a commercial unit that's barely audible from my own patio. She's filing noise complaints about equipment that's quieter than her air conditioning. That's what makes it interesting." Frank continued. "Noise complaints trigger automatic property inspections when they involve ongoing construction projects. Protocol requires us to verify both the complaint and the overall project compliance. I'm the inspector assigned to your case, which means I'll be reviewing all permits, safety measures, and," Frank paused meaningfully, "municipal violation histories for all parties involved." The implications hit me immediately. Veronica's complaint wouldn't just be investigated, it would open up every aspect of both our properties to municipal scrutiny. Her rental properties, with their history of creative permit interpretations, would receive the same detailed review as my meticulously documented pool project. She'd just invited official inspection of violations she'd been ignoring for years. "Frank, how long since you've done a comprehensive review of HOA board member properties in this district?" "Been meaning to get around to that. Seems like filing false noise complaints might be the perfect trigger for broader community compliance verification." We both understood what he wasn't saying directly. Municipal inspectors had broad authority to investigate related properties when complaints suggested systematic issues. Veronica's history of targeting other residents, combined with her own questionable compliance record, made her the perfect candidate for expanded scrutiny. "Give me about an hour to finish documentation here," I told Frank while pulling up my municipal database access on my phone. "I think Mrs. Hartwell might be surprised by what comprehensive property inspection protocols actually involve. After hanging up, I spent 30 minutes reviewing public records that made my pool project look like a minor paperwork exercise. Veronica's 3 rental properties showed a pattern of permit shortcuts that would make any code enforcement officer salivate. Unpermitted electrical work, structural modifications without engineering approval, and safety violations that had been accumulating penalty fees for over 2 years. The total fines already assessed but unpaid exceeded $40,000. But the real prize was her owner-occupied tax status claim. Property tax records showed Veronica claiming homestead exemptions on 2 different properties simultaneously, a form of tax fraud that automatically triggered criminal investigation protocols. Her noise complaint hadn't just opened the door to civil penalties, it had activated federal oversight of her entire real estate portfolio. As I prepared my response documentation, I heard the unmistakable sound of multiple vehicles pulling into my driveway through my front window. I watched Veronica emerge from her white BMW, gesturing authoritatively to 2 police officers who looked less than enthusiastic about their morning assignment. Officer Bradley appeared to be the senior partner, a stocky man in his 40s who'd clearly dealt with HOA disputes before. Officer Chen was younger, taking notes with the careful attention of someone who'd learned that neighbor complaints could escalate quickly. Veronica had dressed for battle in a navy business suit and carried a leather portfolio that probably contained every HOA regulation she could find to support her case. Her confidence was absolute as she pointed toward my backyard, no doubt explaining how my illegal construction activities were destroying neighborhood tranquility and property values. What she didn't realize was that I'd been preparing for this confrontation since my first HOA citation 8 months ago. Every interaction documented, every regulation researched, every potential countermove planned and rehearsed. Municipal code enforcement had taught me that bullies rely on intimidation and ignorance, but they collapse quickly when faced with superior knowledge and documentation. I grabbed my project permits, noise level readings, and municipal database printouts, then walked outside to meet my accusers. The morning air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant hum of suburban life beginning its daily routine. Neighbors were starting to notice the police presence, and I could see curtains moving as people positioned themselves for better views of whatever drama was about to unfold. "Mr. Sullivan," Veronica called out before I'd even reached the driveway, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "This unauthorized construction noise ends now. I've filed formal complaints with both the police and municipal code enforcement, and these officers are here to ensure immediate cessation of all construction activities violating community noise ordinances." She gestured dramatically toward my backyard while maintaining eye contact with Officer Bradley, clearly expecting him to take immediate action based on her word alone. The leather portfolio opened to reveal printed copies of HOA covenants, Municipal Noise Régulation, and what appeared to be a prepared statement documenting her complaint in precise legal language. "Mrs. Hartwell," I replied calmly, pulling out my phone with a slight smile. "I appreciate your concern for community standards. Before we discuss noise violations, though, I think there's something you should know about Municipal Code 247-6 and how it applies to property inspection protocols when formal complaints are filed." The change in her expression was subtle but unmistakable, a flicker of uncertainty that suggested she'd just realized this confrontation might not proceed exactly as she'd planned. Officer Bradley's eyebrows raised slightly as he looked between Veronica and me, clearly sensing this situation had more complexity than a simple noise complaint. "Municipal Code 247-6, he repeated, consulting his own notes. "Ma'am, you mentioned noise ordinances, but didn't reference any specific municipal codes in your complaint." I pulled up my phone's audio recording app, showing the timestamp from 30 minutes earlier. "Officer, this app has been running since 6 a.m. measuring decibel levels throughout my property. At 6:30 a.m., when Mrs. Hartwell claims excessive noise was disturbing the peace, my equipment was registering 42 decibels. That's quieter than normal conversation, and well below the municipal threshold of 65 decibels for residential construction. Veronica's confidence flickered as I continued. Municipal Code 247. 6. Specifically addresses false noise complaints and requires automatic property compliance verification for all parties involved when formal complaints are filed. It's designed to prevent exactly this type of harassment. Harassment? Veronica's voice rose an octave. I am the duly elected president of this homeowners association, and I have every right to enforce community standards. Your construction activities are clearly violating noise ordinances. Regardless of whatever gadgets you're using to claim otherwise. Officer Chen stepped forward, consulting his tablet. Sir, you mentioned property compliance verification. Can you explain what that involves? This was the moment I'd been preparing for since Veronica's first citation 8 months ago. Certainly. Officer, when formal noise complaints are filed against construction projects, municipal protocol requires comprehensive inspection of both the complained about property and the complainant's properties to verify overall community compliance. It's a safeguard against selective enforcement and false reporting. I watched Veronica's face as the implications dawned on her. Officer Bradley, perhaps Mrs. Hartwell should know that I spent 12 years as a municipal code enforcement officer before transitioning to private construction consulting. I actually helped write the regulations she's been quoting, including the property inspection protocols that her complaint just triggered. The leather portfolio in Veronica's hands trembled slightly. That's impossible. You're a pool contractor. I've seen your business license. Pool construction is my current specialty. Yes, but municipal code enforcement was my career for over a decade. I authored safety regulations in 3 districts and consulted on statewide HOA compliance standards. I turned to Officer Bradley. If you'd like verification, you can contact Frank Castellano at Municipal Inspection Services. He's the inspector assigned to review this complaint, and he's actually on his way here now. Officer Chen's radio crackled to life with a dispatch message about a municipal inspector requesting police presence for a property compliance verification. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Mrs. Hartwell, I continued, maintaining my calm tone while watching her authority crumble in real time. When you filed this noise complaint, you triggered an automatic review process. Municipal inspectors will now examine all properties involved in the complaint to ensure comprehensive community compliance. Your 3 rental properties at Brookside Apartments, Elm Street Condominiums, and the duplex on Cedar Avenue will all receive full municipal inspection within 72 hours. The blood drained from Veronica's face. How do you know about my rental properties? Municipal property databases are public record. What's interesting is the violation history associated with those addresses: unpermitted electrical work, structural modifications without engineering approval, and safety violations that have been accumulating penalty fees for riders to Beer and NT9. Let me check. I scrolled through my phone. 26 months. Frank Castellano's white municipal inspection truck turned into my driveway, its official city seal gleaming in the morning sun. At 58, Frank still cut an imposing figure in his inspector's uniform, and his reputation for thorough, uncompromising work preceded him throughout the district. Both officers immediately deferred to his authority as he approached our group. Morning. Marcus, Frank called out with a slight grin. Got your noise complaint investigation here. Also have a few follow-up items that came up during preliminary record review. He nodded professionally to the officers before turning his attention to Veronica. Mrs. Hartwell, I presume? I'm Inspector Castellano. Municipal Code Enforcement. Your formal complaint this morning has triggered some interesting discoveries. Veronica attempted to regain her composure. Inspector, I simply reported excessive construction noise that was disturbing the peace. This is a routine HOA enforcement matter. Nothing that requires municipal intervention. Frank consulted his tablet with practiced efficiency. Well, ma'am, noise complaints involving ongoing construction automatically trigger comprehensive property compliance verification. Standard protocol. What makes this case particularly interesting is the pattern of violations associated with properties under your ownership. He showed his screen to Officer Bradley while continuing. 3 properties. Multiple unpermitted modifications. Safety violations dating back over 2 years. Total accumulated fines currently stand at... Frank scrolled through data. $47,300. Plus, there's an interesting discrepancy in property tax filings that my office is required to report to federal authorities. I watched Veronica's carefully constructed authority disintegrate as Frank laid out the scope of her violations. Her rental properties had been cutting corners for years, gambling that selective enforcement and municipal oversight gaps would let major violations slide indefinitely. The noise complaint had just eliminated those gaps. Federal authorities? Officer Chen asked, clearly realizing this situation had escalated beyond simple neighbor disputes. Property tax fraud. Frank explained matter-of-factly. Mrs. Hartwell has been claiming owner-occupied exemptions on 2 properties simultaneously. That's federal tax fraud with mandatory reporting requirements. My office flagged it this morning when we ran compliance verification on all parties involved in the noise complaint. Veronica's voice became disparate. This is ridiculous. I filed a simple noise complaint about construction starting before 8 a.m. You can't inspect my other properties based on a noise issue at a completely different address. Actually, ma'am, we can and we must. Frank replied with professional courtesy. Municipal Code 247. 6 specifically requires comprehensive compliance verification when formal complaints are filed. It prevents harassment complaints and ensures community-wide safety standards. Your complaint triggered automatic review of all properties associated with the complainant. By now, neighbors had begun emerging from their houses. Drawn by the presence of police and municipal vehicles, Janet Mills from across the street approached tentatively, followed by Robert Hayes from 2 houses down. Both had been targets of Veronica's enforcement enthusiasm over the past year. Excuse me, Janet called out nervously. Is everything okay? We saw the police cars and the city inspector. Frank turned to include the neighbors in his explanation. Just conducting a property compliance verification triggered by a noise complaint. Standard procedure when formal complaints are filed. Are you folks residents of this HOA community? Yes. Sire, Robert replied, glancing nervously at Veronica. We're both on the receiving end of HOA enforcement actions from Mrs. Hartwell here. She's been very thorough in finding violations. Interesting. Frank made notes on his tablet. As part of this investigation, I'll need to document any patterns of selective enforcement or harassment complaints. Would you be willing to provide statements about your experiences with HOA enforcement in this community? Janet's confidence grew as she realized official authority was actually listening to residents' concerns. Mrs. Hartwell fined me $200 because my garden fence was allegedly 6 inches taller than regulations allow. She measured it herself with a tape measure and issued the citation that same day. And she threatened to call code enforcement on my workshop, Robert added, claiming my weekend woodworking violated noise ordinances. But she never filed an actual complaint, just used the threat to make me stop working on projects. Frank nodded thoughtfully. That suggests a pattern of selective enforcement and intimidation tactics. Mrs. Hartwell, using threats of municipal action to control neighbor behavior without actually filing legitimate complaints, constitutes harassment under municipal guidelines. Veronica's desperation was becoming obvious to everyone present. This is completely unfair. I was simply enforcing community standards as elected by the Homeowners Association. Every citation I've issued has been technically correct, according to HOA covenants. Technical correctness doesn't prevent abuse of authority. I interjected calmly. The Brookside case established precedent that HOA board members who weaponize enforcement procedures for personal vendettas can face both civil and criminal penalties. The mention of Brookside made Veronica go pale again. She clearly remembered that case. An HOA president who'd lost everything after being convicted of harassment and fraud related to selective enforcement practices. The parallels to her own situation were impossible to ignore. Frank's radio crackled with an update from municipal headquarters. After a brief conversation, he turned back to our group with a serious expression. "Mrs. Hartwell, I've just received authorization for immediate inspection of your 3 rental properties. Municipal safety inspectors will be conducting comprehensive reviews beginning at 2 p.m. today. You're required to provide access and documentation for all modifications made within the past 5 years. Today?" Veronica's voice cracked. "But it's already past noon. I need time to prepare documentation. Contact my contractors." "Ma'am, emergency. Inspection. Don't provide advance notice. That's the whole point. We need to see current conditions, not hastily corrected violations." Frank's tone remained professional but firm. "Additionally, the tax fraud allegations require immediate reporting to federal authorities. IRS investigators will likely contact you within the week." Officer Bradley stepped forward as Frank continued documenting violations. "Mrs. Hartwell, while these municipal matters are being resolved, I need to address the original noise complaint. Mr. Sullivan has provided clear evidence that no noise ordinance violations occurred. Filing false police reports is a misdemeanor offense." The complete collapse of Veronica's authority was painful to watch, even for someone who'd been her target for 8 months. Her carefully constructed image as the community's righteous enforcer had crumbled in less than an hour, replaced by the reality of someone who'd been violating the very standards she'd demanded from others. "Please." Veronica's voice became small. "Surely we can work something out. I'm willing to withdraw the noise complaint. This was obviously a misunderstanding." Frank shook his head firmly. "Ma'am, municipal investigations can't be withdrawn once formal complaints trigger compliance verification. The inspection process has to run its course to ensure community safety standards." I felt a moment of genuine sympathy for Veronica, even after months of harassment. "Mrs. Hartwell, municipal code enforcement isn't about punishment, it's about bringing properties into compliance and ensuring community safety. If you work cooperatively with the inspection process and address violations promptly, penalties can often be reduced through compliance agreements." "How much are we talking about?" she asked quietly. Frank consulted his tablet extensively before responding. "Current accumulated fines are $47,300. Emergency inspection results could add substantial additional penalties depending on safety violations discovered. However, voluntary compliance agreements can reduce financial penalties by up to 60% if violations are corrected within mandated timeframes." The mathematics of Veronica's situation were stark. Even with maximum cooperation and compliance agreements, she was looking at $20,000 minimum in immediate penalties, plus the costs of bringing 3 properties up to current code standards. The federal tax fraud investigation represented additional financial exposure that could easily reach 6 figures. "What about my HOA position?" Veronica asked, though she clearly already knew the answer. Municipal ethics guidelines require automatic suspension of HOA authority for board members under investigation for harassment and fraud. Frank explained. The community will need to hold emergency elections for interim leadership while these matters are resolved. By 3 p.m., municipal inspectors had begun their systematic review of Veronica's rental properties. Frank kept me updated via text as violations mounted. Unpermitted electrical work that created fire hazards, structural modifications that compromised building integrity, and safety equipment that hadn't been inspected in years. The final violation count exceeded 40 separate infractions across the 3 properties. The federal tax investigation moved with surprising speed. IRS agents contacted Veronica by phone that same afternoon, requesting comprehensive documentation of her property ownership and tax filings for the past 5 years. The homestead exemption fraud was clear-cut and well-documented, making prosecution almost inevitable. Within a week, the HOA held emergency elections that removed Veronica from the board entirely and elected a new leadership committee focused on reasonable, consiste enforcement practice. Janet Mills was elected president, and Robert Hayes became the new compliance coordinator. Their first official act was appointing me as a consulting advisor for municipal code compliance, ensuring future enforcement would be both fair and legally sound. The long-term consequences for Veronica were severe but entirely self-inflicted. Municipal fines ultimately totaled $87,000 after inspection results were finalized. 2 of her rental properties were declared uninhabitable pending major safety renovations, eliminating rental income for months while repairs were completed. Her real estate license came under review by the state board, and the federal tax fraud conviction carried both financial penalties and potential jail time. But the most satisfying consequence was the cultural change in our community. The new HOA leadership implemented transparent appeal processes, consiste enforcement standard, and regular compliance education for residents. Property values actually increased as the community became known for fairness rather than arbitrary harassment. Neighbors began cooperating on projects instead of looking for violations to report. My pool project was completed ahead of schedule and became a showcase for proper permit compliance and safety standards. Frank used it as a training example for other inspectors, demonstrating how municipal regulations could enhance rather than hinder quality construction when properly understood and implemented. The finished result exceeded every safety standard and created a beautiful space that brought the community together. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Veronica's harassment campaign had ultimately created the very outcome she'd tried to prevent. A resident with enough expertise and authority to ensure HOA enforcement would be fair, legal, and focused on genuine community improvement rather than personal power trips. Municipal code enforcement teaches you that justice isn't about revenge, it's about creating systems that protect everyone equally. Veronica's downfall wasn't the result of vindictive action, but simply the natural consequence of her own choices catching up with her. When you weaponize regulations against others while ignoring them yourself, you're building your own trap. The most important lesson from this whole experience is that knowledge truly is power, especially when dealing with bullies who rely on intimidation and ignorance. Understanding your rights, documenting everything, and knowing how systems actually work can level any playing field. Professional expertise isn't just about career advancement, it's about protecting yourself and your community from those who abuse authority. Have you ever had to use your professional knowledge to fight back against workplace bullies or neighborhood tyrants? What expertise do you have that others might not expect? Sometimes the skills we take for granted can become the most powerful tools for justice when the situation demands it. Share your stories about times when knowing the rules helped you beat someone trying to break them. Speaking of people who thought they could break the rules without consequences, wait until you hear about the apartment landlord who tried to evict a single mother for excessive cooking smells and cultural food violations. What he didn't know was that she worked as a health department inspector and had been documenting his building's violations for months. The revenge she served was colder than last week's leftovers, and twice as satisfying. That story's coming up next. And trust me, you won't want to miss how she turned his discrimination into his destruction